I have been coding for the past 10 years. I worked on a lot of different stuff. I created websites, games, I created Chrome extensions, AI, I did VR technology, AR technology. I did a lot of different stuff. And the clients that I work with, some of them were government organs, some of them were international companies. Some of those brands you already know and are familiar with. I worked with millionaires, billionaires, content creators. I have done a lot of different stuff, and everything came from basically the decision that I made 10 years ago. And if you're thinking also about going through the same path as I did and becoming a software developer and a programmer, I want to show you how 10 years after making that decision looks like and the pitfalls that you should definitely avoid. I just want to, if you watch this whole video and you learn from my mistakes, you can learn so much faster than I did, and you can shorten the time span that it took me from 10 years to only a few years if you uh, don't make the same mistakes as I did. Now, I'll get right into this, but again, just another warning and a heads up. The video is not as a usual 10 years of coding video. Usually, people would just go over the projects and the frameworks that they have used and in what order or what sequence did they learn the languages and done the projects. But I want to provide more value than just listing the projects that I have done. I'll definitely mention them, but I just want to focus more on the emotions that I felt and how it basically looks from a POV perspective to go through the 10 years and to go to a roller coaster of experiences as you're entering the tech industry. I think that will be more valuable to somebody starting than just listing projects that I have done. It doesn't really mean to them that much. So yeah, before starting, I want to show you how 10 years of coding looks like. Let's dive in. Okay, so it's 2014. I'm 12 or 13 at that time. I'm playing a lot of games. I spend most of my times on the family computer browsing internet, playing video games like GTA, Minecraft, Counter Strike, the usual stuff. And I started to get this feeling of curiosity, like how do I create a game as well. I'm spending so much time on these websites browsing the internet playing games, but who made them, like how are they actually made? And that curiosity got me into taking my first programming course ever. It was on Codecademy. I took a JavaScript course, and once I finished it, I started creating my own text-based adventures, basically using the JavaScript alert function. Now, for me, that was enough. I was ready to become rich. My goal as a young kid was to become a young tech prodigy and to basically get rich off creating either a game or a big tech company. I looked up to Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Zuck, Notch. These guys were my inspiration, and I wanted to join them in the club of creating something great just through coding. So that's where my first lesson comes in. And I made the mistake a few times, but I learned it pretty fast. Lesson number one, set your North Star. Decide on what type of programmer you want to become. A goal is not to make $1 million. A goal is to become a person that is able to make $1 million. So set your North Star, set your guide, and your final goal that will inspire you to work towards it. What type of programmer do you want to become? Do you want to become the tech CEO? Do you want to become a young prodigy? Do you want to be a game developer? Do you want to develop artificial intelligence? Do you want to create apps, websites? It all depends upon you. So set that goal and always keep it in mind when coding. Okay, so this is where we enter my game development era. As I said, I set the North Star. I want to be a rich game developer. I looked up to Notch as he was the only guy at that time that has made a lot of money through his titles. And that was a solo developer, not a big company. So what I did was I started Googling. How do I create a game? I knew JavaScript, I knew the basics of coding, I knew the basic logics of variables, if functions, loops, collections, and now I felt as I was ready to start developing my first game. I started Googling and started to get introduced to a game engine that's called Unity. I think most of you guys are already familiar with it, but Unity is a program that you can use to develop games using C Sharp. At that time, it was C Sharp and JavaScript as well. So I set my goal. I wanted to create my first ever video game, which was just a pet rock that will move horizontally and vertically from a 2D bird's eye view. And this is where my second lesson comes in. Create a project and learn as you go. Break down the project into smaller parts that are manageable and then solve the smaller parts. The pet rock example, you have the graphics and you have the pet rock moving. So we got to figure out those two issues. What we do, we just start Googling. How do I move something horizontally and vertical in the 2D dimension in Unity? How do I create graphics in Unity? Once those two issues are solved, we have our final project. After I created my first ever video game, of course I showed it to everybody, but that wasn't enough. That was just the beginning. I just got the taste of creating my own finished projects, and it just started snowballing. I created more and more games that were more and more complex, adding multiplayer, 3D graphics, physics, and after some while I got so good at it that I actually published my first ever game on the Google Play Store. And it actually made money. It made good money at that time. It made $400 and I was 15 or 16 at that time, which was to me a sign that if I just keep on coding, this can happen. So this is where the next lesson comes in. Start small, learn as you go, and progressively overload your projects. Let's break it down. Start small. You already know it. Start with a smaller project, because what you want to do is enter the flow state where the project is not too hard where it causes you anxiety, but it's not too easy where it's just boring to do. It's right in the center where you're most productive. Second thing, learn as you go. I see this so many times. I saw people finishing these courses, talking about programming, asking other developers about their advice, and never writing a single line of code. Create the project in your mind that you want to create, make it small, and then just start coding it. And once you finish that project, progressively overload, which means once you finish the current project, make sure that the next projects you're working on is harder than the one before. Those are the steps that you need to take in order to go from developing a Flappy Bird clone to a full-fledged multiplayer physics-based 3D game. This is the same concept as in the gym. You wouldn't go into the gym as a total beginner and start to bench 100 kilograms. You would start small. First learn the technique, then add some weight. Then when that weight feels light, you would add some more weight. And you just keep on going, just adding more weight and doing the reps. That's how you actually progress. It's same in the gym and with coding. Make sure that the next project is always harder than the one before it. And I'm still implementing that till this day. I make sure that the next project that I'm working on for a client is always harder, has some elements that I'm unfamiliar with, so that it forces me to grow in order to finish that project. Now, this is where my story hits a rock bottom. I started getting lost, not lost. I started getting distracted. I created my first game, started making money, and I got so excited that I started asking myself, what else can I code to make some money? And this is where I lost my focus. And for a good 3 to 4 years, I was just going back and forth from creating games, websites, apps. I started doing hacking, and it was all in the same goal of trying to get rich. Yes, it taught me a lot of different technologies, and I have now a broader view of the whole tech industry and how everything works. But if your main goal is getting rich and making as much money as possible, this is where I fucked up the most. And the lesson that I learned maybe last year: focus only on one thing. The current market doesn't reward anybody who is a generalist, who knows a little bit about everything. People will never pay you to help them with a generalized problem. They will always come to you for a solution for a really specific problem. So that means you gotta become a specialist. Focus on one thing. That's where the North Star comes into play. You wanna be a game developer? Only focus on developing as much games as possible. Progressively overload the games so that the quality of games goes up. And after a few years, you will be an expert in game development. If you do the same thing that I did, where you go from gaming to web design to AI to cybersecurity and then back to gaming, you'll just end up losing your time and not progressing on the main goal and losing the sight of the North Star. Now, after a few years of being distracted working on these different technologies, different projects, I finally caught myself making the mistake that I just mentioned. I realized that I was just lacking focus, that it was more interesting to me to start working on this other new shiny thing where the grass is always greener than the projects that I'm always currently working on. And that's why I decided to log back in and only focus on developing for the sole purpose of making as much money as possible. Now, I started forming teams. I knew that companies weren't just one person working on a project. It was a team of developers, programmers, QA testers, marketers, managers. It was a lot of people everybody doing their own job. And I started forming these little teams working on my passion projects. I didn't pay them anything. It was just like a group of friends working on a single project that I have envisioned. Of course, they failed. I didn't have the skills to manage a team. I didn't have the persistence to go through the hard parts of developing a big title and then actually publishing it to the store. But it taught me how to work in teams, and that skill has paid dividends years after. But again, those projects were just stepping stone, progressively overloading. I managed to work on projects by myself. The harder part was working in teams. And then this is where everything took off. I got a call one day from a professor from a college that my sister went to. He heard that I had been using Unity for years, and he wanted me to teach a class about how to use Unity for their experiments. I showed him some of the projects that I have done. He was impressed by my work and wanted me to teach the whole class about using Unity for their experiments. This partnership has spiraled into me working with the Serbian government, working with this biggest telecommunication company here in Serbia, educating them about using VR technologies for employment trainings. And these projects opened my eyes that it was possible. And it was not possible only on a smaller scale. I was remembering the days where I developed the mobile games and published them on the App Store. It was actually possible to work on big projects. This was the first time where I made more than $1,000 on a project. And that reassured me that, again, if I just keep on coding, it's possible. I was starting to go to college, and I realized that if by the end of college I don't figure this shit out, I'll have to get a job. So I created my Upwork profile where I started sending proposals daily. And in my first month, I managed to close a $15,000 client for a year-long project where we created 2 desktop games that are multiplayer on the blockchain, and then 2 web games and a gaming platform on top of it. Now, this is where the next lesson comes in. Growth is exponential. You start slow, boring, you feel frustrated, you just are feeling as if you're coding into oblivion. Nobody's seeing your work. You are doing these courses, you're watching these YouTube videos, you're creating these projects, but it feels as if it's all for nothing. And it feels like it's never going to end. That's why it's exponential. If you see an exponential graph, the first part is always the lowest. But if you just keep on pushing, it gets to the point where everything clicks and it just starts compounding, and it just gets faster and faster and faster. So just remember that as you're starting, remember that the first few years are meant to be hard, are meant to be boring, and are the slowest years, which is good. That means that if you push through them, on the other side of those first few years that are the hardest is some of the best years that you're ever going to experience in your career. So yeah, as you saw from example, you don't need to be nerdy, you don't need to be well educated, you don't need to be some genius. You just need a lot of effort, a lot of time, and after you go through that initial phase of the exponential growth that is the hardest, you reap all the benefits. And 90% of people never get there. Don't be the 90%. See you.